Hi guys, welcome to episode 5 of Mamemeister's High Score Kerfuffle Season 6. Last week's game was from 1983, and a back-to-back selection from Paul, which was Xerion, released by Jaleco. Game, I'd say, is generous, and what a steaming turd this is. Let's start with its only redeeming feature, and that's the graphics. The parallax scrolling gives a great pseudo 3D effect, and it's nice how it scrolls as you move. The rest from my perspective is dross. Let's start with the biggest issue, and that's the inertia on your ship. There's a reason that most shmups don't do this, and that's that it really restricts what you can do. You basically can't change direction, as you're too slow to do that, and you're probably going to get hit. This means that you end up having to do loops around the screen, dodging things as best you can. For the enemies that move in predictable ways, this is fine, but that's not the case for all the enemies, particularly the purple satellites. Their movement is quite erratic, so that, coupled with your inability to move, sucks what fun there may have been completely away. The next thing that annoys me is the size of your ship. It's just too wide. The long wings may look nice, especially when you get the impression of rotation, but again, because you are so slow to change direction, this really reduces the fun. Next up, we've got what seems to be random behaviour of when enemies go off the side of the screen, as to whether they're going to reappear on the other side. Given you're probably doing some repetitive loops, and you can't change direction, this can really fuck you. Last up in things that annoy me about this game, is when enemies are at the top of the screen, and you can't shoot them. Sometimes they will hang around the score bar at the top, and although they are visible and you shoot them, they don't get shot. Given the main scoring mechanic of the game is about not missing, which builds your bonus, having it possible to hit enemies on screen is a bit unfair. So, although I loathe this game and have zero interest in returning to it, it seems some people did like it. So let's take a look at the scores. So we had only 15 scores this week, which is a slight drop. Paul is the first to do 100,000, with Mark and Ian just ahead. Milthy, KMA and Robert are then between 150 and 200,000. In 6th is Leegsy with 220,000, I'm in 5th with 230,000, and Juff is just ahead on 250,000. In my best game, I did 200,000 on the first life, and then the game just fucked me. Our top 3 were all a chunk ahead of everyone. Arcade GG has his best ever finish in 3rd with an excellent 300,000. Graham gradually improved over the week and maybe was capable of a winning score, but he's finished in 2nd with 500,000. But this week's winner has been ahead all week, and I'm pleased to see him pick up his first ever win. And that's Colin with an excellent 600,000. Colin has been a regular since Season 1, and this game is definitely one he gets on with more than most, so this is a great effort and is a well-earned victory. Here is the score distribution, and we see that things are fairly evenly spread across the range. There is a bit of a grouping between 4th and 9th places, but it's a bit more spread than some games you've had. Arcade GG is on his own in 3rd, but then there's a gap to our top 2, who are the class of the field. Both Colin and Graham are in the same bin, suggesting they were close, but ultimately it was Colin who took this week's win. And now the difficulty curve. With the scores spread evenly, we see something very close to a linear increase, which makes sense given the game has a pretty much linear scoring system. There are no significant gaps, which suggests that increased experience and ability for this game should gradually yield increased scores. Finally, we have a return of the high scores over time, but I've given it a complete overhaul, and I think it's looking pretty good. Rather than just plot the high scores over time, I'm plotting everyone's scores over the course of the week. The high score at any given point is obviously the one at the top. The plot we saw last week is basically Colin's curve this week, as he has led at every stage over the week and increases best at multiple points. We see Graham has upped his score twice, but not managed to challenge Colin, and Arcade GG dropped his score but never upped it. For others, you can see their increases over time. I'm in gold, and you can see me make gradual progress, particularly early on and when I spent most of the time around midweek, whereas Juffer dropped an early score before playing a bit towards the end of the week, jumping his score up. Let me know what you think of these changes, and for submissions, the more you put in as you improve, the better the graph will be. Now onto the current league table. KMA has got ahead of Steve and Weebob, but getting ahead of all 3 of them is Arcade GG with that excellent 3rd place this week. Leegsy has got ahead of Mark and Juff. Leegsy has got ahead of Mark, and Juff has got ahead of Ian. Then our biggest mover is this week's winner Colin, who is up 5 places into 4th. Our top 3 remain the same, although they are a little bit more spread out now. I'm 40 points ahead of Paul, but at the top it's Graham, who now has a 70-point lead over me. Now, on to this week's game. So, we're 4 games down, and the next year is 1984, which will mark our halfway point. I've had 14 submissions, and the most popular game was Pac-Land, with 3 votes. Colin chose Irobot, and that gets an equal chance, with his game being treble for that win. So let's set the selector going, and see what we get. Okay, it's slowing down. Oh, and Colin's been lucky. So that win for Xerion has meant that the probability was trebled. And so, yeah, we've got Irobot. I have never even seen this game. I don't know what it is. I'll go look it up and be back in a second. So this week's game is Irobot, released by Atari in 1984. As I said, I'd never heard of this game, and it's certainly an interesting one. Last week we had a pseudo 3D game, and this week we have an actual 3D polygon game. This is the first game to use these graphics in real time, and is arguably one of the most significant, given where we are today with polygon graphics. But with the first iterations of new technologies, they are often worse than the status quo, and so this game was a commercial flop, and there was no way a game like this was coming to home systems. The graphics remind me of Star Fox on the SNES, which came out 10 years later. A quick play and it seems decent. There are alternating levels of a 3D maze type level, where you need to collect the red tiles. The challenge here is to avoid jumping when the eye is red, and not hitting the birds that fly over the screen, but those can be shot. After that is a 3D scrolling shmup section. So, a bit of an oddball this week, but a very significant one in gaming history. For next week, please send me your games from 1985. The games are generally getting better as we get deeper into the 80s, and although we've already had a few 1985 games, there are still some very good ones, including Gradius, Space Harrier, Gauntlet, Ghosts and Goblins, or Paperboy. So, I hope you enjoy playing some Irobot, and I'll be back next week with the scores. See you then.